Hello and welcome everyone to this latest session of the Planetary Society Book Club. I'm Matt Kaplan, the former host and creator of Planetary Radio, now the Senior Communications Advisor for the Planetary Society. That's the new title they came up with for me. And I am joined by probably, I don't know who I may have interviewed more than Ann Druyan across my Planetary Society career, with the possible exception of Linda Spilker, because we had that wonderful mission to Saturn to talk about periodically. But there is absolutely no one that I have enjoyed talking with more than you, Ann. Welcome to the book club.
It's so good to be here with you, Matt. I always enjoy our conversations. They're always stimulating, fascinating.
And the same here. I am left always with a bit of a glow. Let me do the standard bio, which of course you don't need, but here's what I put together. Ann Druyan is the creator, producer, and writer of 2014's Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, and its sequel series, Cosmos, Possible Worlds, as well as the book of the same name. She directed episodes of both of those. 36 years before these, she co-wrote the original Cosmos series that remains, I'm pretty sure, the most popular nonfiction television program in the history of American public television. Quite an accomplishment. She was also creative director for that lovely gold disc that you can see over my shoulder, which has that place of honor in my little home office here. That's the one that sent the best of humanity to the stars on Voyager 1 and 2. Maybe the most romantic and inspiring ever did, if you ignore the little effort to put humans on the moon. And also stood behind the Planetary Society's first attempt to fly a solar sail. That Cosmos 1 project would simply not have happened without her. And, you know, I could go on and on, obviously. You know, at one point in the book, Carl described Ellie Arroway, as a wonder junkie. Doesn't that also apply to you?
Absolutely, and to Carl as well. Not only we were not only wonder junkies, we were significance junkies. We're addicted to finding the meaning of virtually everything. And I think when you're in love, everything becomes significant. In fact, what is love but a heightened sense of the great significance of life? So yes, wonder junkies, skeptical wonder junkies. So those twin engines of skepticism and wonder, equally powerful. And what you get once you have used them to loft you into the beauty of nature is something very powerful.
And it's those twins that, in my experience, you find in every truly great scientist, and a lot of the ones who are merely good scientists, most of them.
Absolutely.
So let me, before we get into contact, a lot of people out there, I'm one of them, are excited to have heard that there are two projects which were underway, maybe now on hold, a documentary about Carl and a feature film. And I did hear that Andrew Garfield has been cast to play Carl. And now, where did I put it? Daisy Edgar Jones to play you, which I can see. I can see that.
I can see it too. Yeah, it's the very romantic story of the making of that record that's behind you, that golden disc. And, you know, as a member in good standing of the Writers Guild since, I think, 1978, and someone who really appreciates the Guild and other unions, of course, you know, everything is in a kind of holding pattern for the moment, and has been since the first week in May. And whenever it's the right time, in the wisdom of the directors of the Guild, and perhaps SAG-AFTRA as well, we'll revisit them and commence.
And we talked about that. I just heard this morning that SAG-AFTRA has voted that they might go out and join the writers on the picket line as soon as tomorrow. Wish both of those guilds the greatest of success.
Me too.
All right, we'll leave that there and wait with bated breath for both of those projects. It was such a delight to reread this book after many years, I have to admit. And especially after having seen the wonderful movie at least 3 times. It could easily be more than that. Great credit to Robert Zemeckis. I'm a huge fan of his. But the tale is so much richer in the book. There's so much more for the kinds of folks who are probably watching right now, the kind of people who join the Planetary Society and believe in our mission. I got a quote. Someone at the Wilmington News Journal wrote back when the book came out that, and I'll quote now, "It is a call for reconciliation between science and religion on the common ground of reverence for the magnificence of the universe, as uplifting as a trip to the stars." How central was that theme to you and Carl as this book was coming together?
Oh, it was completely central. It was central, period. We were involved in an environmental effort with then Senator Al Gore.
Oh.
And it was called The Joint Appeal in Religion and Science on behalf of the environment. This is going back to the 1980s, when Carl was one of the few people, one of the few scientists sounding the alarm on climate change. And when I think of how completely energized and inspired he was 40 years ago to sound the alarm, testifying before Congress, saying it was a national security issue, and being somewhat, ridiculed at the time. But what we both felt was that what science had made possible for both of us was a spiritual experience, and one that, in our view, had the wonderful additional benefit of not requiring any self-deception. There was no special pleading that was necessary, but the wonder, the grandeur of nature revealed by science was to both of us a kind of heightened spiritual experience. The universe isn't a couple of thousand years old. No, you are part of a continuity that stretches back nearly 14 billion years. Universe wasn't this Earth-centric little clockwork of a dozen worlds. No, it was in fact a realm of inconceivable vastness. And it always struck me and Carl that it was amazing that religious leaders didn't say, "Oh, wow, this is a much bigger, much more amazing universe than our sacred books ever mentioned." And is something much more profound, more multi-leveled, more ancient, more everything than we ever dreamt. Wow, let's do, the new edition of these sacred books, which includes not only the moral teachings and the inspired feelings of love, but also the universe revealed by science. So that was something we talked about constantly. And Carl was remarkable in that he could, when he would argue or debate with creation scientists, it was always a source of amazement to them that he could quote their sacred books chapter and verse more perfectly than they could. He was a student of all the different manifestations of our yearning for the numinous, our yearning for these spiritual experiences. And so what we conceived of together, because the book and the movie was based on a 110-page treatment that we wrote as co-authors, what we dreamed of was not a book in which science hits religion over the head with a frying pan and says, boy, we got you. Or religion somehow in the end is revealed to be superior in some way to the scientific approach, but instead a kind of a magnificent synthesis of these great impulses in the human soul. And so that was the dream of Contact, not to give all the good lines to the scientists and not to give all the best lines to the religious leaders. And you hit it right on the head, Matt. That was the idea.
This is one of the reasons I think the character of Palmer Joss, that seeking preacher, questing preacher, is so important in the book. And this quote from him: "Any faith that admires truth, that strives to know God, must be brave enough to accommodate the universe." What can you say about Palmer? I guess you already have.
Well, that's what we wanted him to be, a positive figure. Because, when we were writing this in the 1980s, we started in 1979, actually. When we were writing this, mostly in the 1980s, the very famous televangelists of the time were essentially being incarcerated for various crimes and misdemeanors. And, the cliche of the phony, hypocritical, evangelical preacher had been done to death. And what we wanted to do was to create a character who really was searching and who was really open-hearted and not using religion as a means of social control and of, what's the right word, coercion, but instead searching and inviting others to search along. So that was the idea.
We have already started to get some questions from some of you out there. I have a few that are in my notes, those of you who submitted some ahead of time. But I'm going to continue for a minute or two here. If you do have a question, and Jay Miller, thank you for yours. I'll get to it in a few minutes. Use the Q&A function here within Zoom. You may have seen that Amber Trujillo, our wonderful digital community manager, has also set up a separate chat room where I assume some of you were probably trading your statements of awe about what has been already discussed in this hour. But use the Q&A here in Zoom if you have a question for Ann. And I cannot, of course, promise to get to everything, but I'll do my best. I'm going to come back to the spiritual side of this in a moment, but I want to talk about the author's note, the acknowledgments that Carl made at the end of the book. And he expressed his gratitude to this awe-inspiring collection of science heroes and great thinkers, many of whom I have been honored to interview, too many of whom are no longer with us. His last helping of praise, though, went to you. And he said about you, "At every stage in the writing of this book, I have benefited tremendously from Ann Druyan, from the earliest conceptualization of the plot and central characters to the final galley proofing. What I learned from her in the process is what I cherish most about the writing of this book." That's a wonderful tribute.
What can I say? I'm probably the luckiest person who ever lived. I feel that way.
You got a case.
Yeah, I got a case to make because I spent 20 years with not only, I think, one of the smartest people who ever lived, but I really think also one of the most decent people who ever lived, one of the people who gives me the most hope about our species, one of the people who was as brave, as kind, as interested in love as he was in science, as committed to the idea that love is not a place that you arrive at, but it's a never-ending journey. And there's always the possibility to go higher. And that's what he and I had with each other, was this, what felt like a constantly upward trajectory, deeper into the great mystery and joy of love. And so I mean, I could talk about Carl forever.
I hope you will.
I hope I will. I mean, as long as I live, I will be talking about what an amazing person he was.
I was gonna save this for the end, just for a nice dramatic ending, but it's so perfect for right now. You probably remember when your and Carl's daughter, Sasha, came to Pasadena a while back, and to our headquarters. We talked with her about her wonderful book, For Small Creatures Such as We, Rituals for Finding Meaning in Our Unlikely World. It was a great time, great day. That line, though, for small creatures such as we, which is in the book, it's yours, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you remember the rest
Yes,
of the
the
line?
rest of the line is the vastness is only bearable through love. And in fact, I remember we were in this very house downstairs in the living room, and Carl had his dictation machines and 2 dictation machines, one in each hand, one for the novel, the popular articles, things like that, the other for scientific papers, planetary report, all of those things that he was, those 6 or 7 careers that he was practicing. And Sasha, now I could also talk for Sasha about Sasha forever. Can you imagine, Matt, the pride I feel as a mother in this woman who wrote this magnificent book?
Yeah, it's lovely.
Which is so fascinating on so many different levels, not only examining the scientific underpinnings of the world's religious holidays, but also conceiving of new rituals that reflect our science-based lives, and returning those religious rituals, which she holds sacred and has such respect for, and rerooting them in the scientific phenomena, which was their original birthplace. And writing so poetically and so beautifully, and writing about her childhood in our home and our parenting. And I mean, there's a Yiddish word, tukvel, and I think that's the only word that really can possibly come close to describing the feelings that she inspires, and that Nick Sagan and Sam Sagan, all our children, our grandson Antonio Sagan, all of them really make us feel.
Back to the book, or more closely related to the book, and I'm not the only person who has thought about this. Ulysses, Dave Bowman, Ellie Arroway. Did Carl take us on another Odyssey?
Well, Ellie Arroway, I love that name, by the way. And I love to tell the story of how we got that name. It is because of Eleanor Roosevelt, whom we both admired very deeply, co-author of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and inviter of Marian Anderson to sing at the Lincoln Memorial, and violator of so many of the wicked taboos of the 1930s and 40s that were really so blind and sick, just a transcendent woman. So Eleanor Arroway. Now, Arroway, first of all, because we love the idea of an arrowway, as you were catching, the idea of an arrow being sent.
An arc.
And the arcing trajectory of the arrow. Yeah. But really, because it was Voltaire's real name, Arroway, not spelled the same way. Not the Arroway, but instead spelled differently. But it was a little tipping of the hat to Voltaire and to Eleanor Roosevelt. And that's how we found Eleanor Arroway.
I'm going to put in a brief plug here, and the show may have closed. a theatrical company here in the San Diego area called North County Repertory, I think. My wife and I just saw last Friday the one-woman show Eleanor. Absolutely outstanding. I mean, Eleanor was already a hero of ours. And anyone who has not already studied her life, or at least looked into it, you are missing one of the greatest humans of the 20th or any other century.
And I also recommend her autobiography.
Mm.
What a great person she was,
Yeah.
and how wise she was. And so that's what we wanted to do, is to, but I see so much Carl in Eleanor Arroway.
Sure.
And
other people. And well, yes. Okay. You take it.
no, I was just going to say, I mean, there was just as with Carl, she was a scientist because she was following her bliss, and just as he was. And it was, what is the most efficient? What is the error correcting mechanism, the winnowing machine that can wean us of our delusions and things we want to believe but aren't true? And so, whenever I think of her, I think of him. That's, and he was very kind. He often said that his part of her was based on me, and I said it was based on him, and that's what it was like.
I'm going to go to a somewhat related question from the aforementioned Jay Miller. The industrialist who's depicted in the book and is also in the movie, somewhat different characterization, was S.R. Haddon.
Yes.
Jay says there was a Mesopotamian king.
Yes. That's it.
Named
S.R.
Haddon.
Jay, you got it.
I'll be darned. Nice work, Jay.
Assurbanipal, exactly. S.R. Haddon. And weren't we clever to anticipate those spacefaring billionaires who, because remember, when we were writing it, there was, the U.S. government, the government of the USSR, and a few other nations were the only spacefaring entities on Earth. There was no such thing as a private space project. It was all governmental. So I think that was one of the many things in the book that's kind of prescient.
Yes, absolutely. Here's one from Kevin Rush, and he had actually submitted this ahead of time and resubmitted it here in the Q&A section. And I will add to this that Kevin apparently got to go to one of the premiere screenings of Contact because he was a Planetary Society New Millennium member and got to talk to you at the reception and had a wonderful time. His question, though, was what was the best part? What was the best part of the experience of both writing the book and making the movie, working with Robert Zemeckis?
Oh, the best part, by far, was staying up late with Carl. The kids were asleep, and just doing that kind of what I always compare to sea mammals swimming through the ocean together, thinking together and getting ideas together. There were parts of it that I would write. Of course, not any of the scientific parts or anything like that, but all of the personal stuff and, the kind of emotional, fictional stuff. And the joy of handing a page or two to Carl and sitting across from him, and he's reading, and I see a smile forming. And if he really loved what I did, he would tip an imaginary hat. And that was like the highest high for me. But it was just the stimulation, and the same thing, hearing for the first time before anyone else heard it. Carl, dictating these passages that went into the book virtually unchanged. He really spoke in lapidary prose, by which I mean you could have engraved what he was saying in marble. It was so, there was no, he thought in exquisite, perfect paragraphs. And the laughter, just the joy of creating anything with him And that feeling of, the two of us together being more than the sum of our parts, because we're bringing out the best in each other. And of course, he was so phenomenal that it was just awesome to be in his presence while he was creating so many of these unforgettable works. I mean, it's just, here we are, and he's been gone for 27 years almost. And yet his presence, look online, look at Instagram, look anywhere, is more palpable and more sentient than his absence is more palpable and sentient than so many other people's presence. I mean, he's just, and it's as if the world is just catching up with him. We as a species are just, yes, you're right, climate change. Of course. I wish we had listened to you 45 years ago. Wow, that was a big mistake. And about so many things.
Lapidary prose, you're no slouch in that area, and that's, I'm sure, I have this image of the two of you, as dolphins in perfect sync leaping out of the water together.
Yes. And the greatest thing was that both of us would always misremember who, like one of us would say to the other, oh, I really love that page. Oh my God, that was brilliant. Annie, that was your page, And I was saying, no, Carl, I'm sure. And I was sure it was his page. And, it was always that way. We would just it was beautiful.
I got one of those for you. And maybe you can give me the attribution for this. It's one of the best justifications for SETI that I've ever read. It's right out of chapter 2. One of many, many examples of Carl's own convictions coming, out of the characters and yours. Here it is. Nobody's guaranteeing success. But can you think of a more important question? Imagine them out there sending us signals and nobody on Earth is listening. That would be a joke, a travesty. Wouldn't you be ashamed of your civilization if we were able to listen and didn't have the gumption to do it?
Yeah, that is pure Carl. That's 100% Carl.
Okay.
Exactly.
If you say so.
He felt it was a kind of cosmic citizenship test. And he was longing for us to qualify as citizens of the cosmos. And so, that was purely Carl. He had, he'd been thinking about it since he was a child. I don't know if you've probably seen that beautiful drawing that's in the collection at the Library of Congress of Carl that Carl made when he was 11 years old.
Yes.
A recruiting poster for an interstellar fleet. And, he's the headlines in the newspapers of the day, stretching deep into the future with each stepping stone, so optimistic. And so, having such a kind of high human self-esteem that we could do these things.
I told our members in the member community that I have 2 questions I've been dying to ask you about contact, which I don't think I ever have. But I'm going to go to a couple of others first. One from Philip Shane, who says, thank you, Anne and Carl, for a lifetime of inspiration, more than any other educators I've ever known. Nice, Philip. What would Carl and you say about the new artificial intelligence? Would he have equated them with the nuclear threat and promise? So leaving the book a little bit here, but maybe not that far afield.
Well, that's a good question. And I'm inadequate to speak for Carl. I could only speak for myself. I feel very keenly I don't have the chops to speak for him, but I would say I'm not afraid of AI, and maybe that's because I'm being impossibly naive. But I have just lived through too many of these technological plateaus where we go from one, I just remember Plato, if I may use the word, bitching about the fact that nobody memorizes anything anymore. They just read. The children of today, they're so corrupt. They just read stuff. They don't bother to commit things to memory. And I think that that's kind of, the voice very often of the older person, which is to view every change. I remember when television was ruining everyone's minds. Children had no, oh my God, these kids raised on television, they're going to be horribly warped. And maybe that's what happened. I don't know. But I don't think so. I think there was as much good in that exposure and that kind of unifying of the country and sort of breaking down the kind of intractable regional differences that happened as a result of television, but also the news of the world, which, some people in their local papers would read a very tiny digest of, but this steady dose of realizing that we are one tiny planet, so people were afraid of television and they're, oh my God, afraid of video games, rock and roll, it just, the list is endless. And this is what I think, obviously, we have yet to devise a form of human social organization that will maximize human potential and bring out the best in us. We've tried many different kinds, but we haven't found that form of social organization which will think in the timescales of science. And that's our responsibility. Clearly, the way we are blowing through the environment and the natural resources that are so plentiful on this planet, and the way we are squandering them, is a reflection of our very bad values as a civilization. It's indisputable. So we have to keep searching, but while there's a shadow on our future, I don't believe that this is the darkest time in our history. In fact, as a person of 74 years of age, I have to say that having been a child of the 1950s, there's virtually, I would not go back there for any amount of anything, to go back to a time of such misogyny, racism, homophobia, xenophobia, such a sick time. And so it's my tendency, and maybe it's because I'm an optimist, but it's my tendency to see how much things are improving, how much our awareness is heightened of what our true circumstances are. So I don't have this terror about AI, because I think it doesn't matter if we have AI, we already have nuclear weapons. We already are influencing the climate and the environment to such a degree that that's just gilding the ugliest of lilies, really. It's just the AI. And either we deal with them all, or one of them will get us. And that's just it. So I think it's an amazing creative tool. And personally, I don't want anyone putting words in Carl's mouth. I feel that's something that's absolutely wrong. And I would, I will use everything I have to keep that from happening. But I still think that there are appropriate uses for it, and that we shouldn't, push the panic button yet.
I'm going to use that great comment about this potential paradigm change, if you'll pardon the expression, paradigm change for human society. That allows me to get into one of those other two questions that I said I wanted to throw at you. And I wrote it out. The book depicts a world gone nearly mad with excitement, anticipation, and for some dread regarding the discovery that we are not alone. And much of the action that takes place in the book is related to that reaction coming from around the world, some of it quite horrible. Do you think today that would really happen, that the world would have that strong of a reaction? Or would it, my fear is that it would be at the top of the news for a few days, and then it would be pushed aside by some politician's latest gaffe or crime, or some atrocity committed someplace. I hope that dearly that it will be as it was written, but I don't know. What do you think?
I think you're right, Matt. You're right. I absolutely think that this is a different time than 1985 when the book was published, And I also think that, remember, that was a time when there were, what, 10, maybe 10 stations on television before the internet.
Yeah, cable
So
just getting started, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and this is what I think. I think so many people on Earth think we already have made contact, even though we haven't. And I think there's a blurring between fact and fiction in so many different ways. Part of it is because we are, in Neil Postman's wonderful phrase, we are entertaining ourselves to death.
Yes, wonderful
And
book.
so we can't go to the supermarket, we can't be driving, we can't do anything on a plane, anywhere, be in an airport without some form of entertainment. And I think, if you were an extraterrestrial looking at our civilization, you might be thinking, there's some things they really don't want to face. They really don't want to come to grips with there's some big issues that they feel they have no power to solve, to challenges they cannot meet. And so they have to be entertained 24/7. And when I say they, I mean we. I am as guilty as anyone else. So I think that's part of it. But I don't think, even if we were to get a message, I think there would be, as you say, immediate fascination. And within days, our attention would wander to something else.
Here's a twist on that scenario. It came again from our member, Philip Shane, that he sent in ahead of the program today. He says I think it would be a long tail kind of situation, a huge burst at first, high emotions, then jokes, and disappearing from the headlines after a few months. But like the original Star Trek, perhaps, simmering in the background of mass culture, bubbling along in interested subcultures explored by science, it would eventually permeate all thought and change ideologies and bend humanity's beliefs and actions in a new direction.
Beautifully expressed. Wow, I'm impressed. Yeah, I think there's a good chance that this person is correct.
I hope so.
He said. Yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends. If it was the receipt of a repeating message that was then, and it was possible that later it was possible to reacquire that signal and to prove that it was of completely extraterrestrial origin, but it was still an abstraction, possibly a mystery in terms of what the message meant. Then I think you would have a kind of something similar to what Champollion and the other people who attempted to decrypt the Egyptian hieroglyphics, which was a kind of phenomenon culturally that went on for some long time. If it was, if somebody actually arrived, that would be a whole different thing, and that would be of continuing fascination, I think, to everyone.
Yes, it just occurred to me that when that utterly alien message arrives, when or if that utterly alien message arrives, it probably will be some AI that helps us figure out what it translates to.
Exactly, and it'll be some AI that'll figure out, the cure for all kinds of intractable afflictions that we have tried to. I mean, that's it. There will be wonderful applications that will be life-changing in the best possible way, as well as, the really troublesome ones.
I've got a few more coming in from our members that I will throw at you before I get to my second big question of my own. This is from Michael Payne. Your discussion reminded me of the dedication in the book Cosmos, in the vastness of space and time and the immensity of time. It is my joy to share a planet and an epoch with Annie.
Carl gave me that on my 30th birthday, which was a long time ago. And I've just never gotten over it. I mean, so romantic, so beautiful.
Yep.
So, what can I say? I'm really humbled by it. I'm completely humbled by it.
Tim Lynch, says, since you were also producer of the film Contact, I'm wondering where you felt the film, A, best lived up to the book, and B, maybe managed to outshine the book, if anywhere, and C, most fell short of the book. And that takes me into my second question, but I'll hold that for a moment.
Okay,
So
I'm
A,
still
lived up to the book, outshone the book,
okay.
or fell short.
Lived up to the book and possibly outshone the book was the first 3 minutes of the film, which is the signal traversing the universe, or the space between here and there. Oh, that was Bob and his team
Bob
did.
Zemeckis, yeah.
Yes. And it was verbatim what Carl dictated into his little dictation machine in our living room. Because I remember sitting on the floor while he was dictating it and just being entranced by every word, hanging on every word. And that's exactly what Bob brilliantly manifested in the opening of the film. And that meant so much to me. I think Jodie Foster completely brought Eleanor Arroway to life and exceeded my wildest expectations. I mean, just, I can never get over it. I got to say that, you know, when I think of the movie, I feel a kind of sadness because remember, that's when Carl was so gravely ill. And that's the only shot that Carl actually lived to see was a month before his death. We traveled to Washington, D.C., and Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey and Bob were there. And one night, Carl gave the most brilliant talk to this little group of maybe 6 people about the nature of the universe. And I've often thought I wished it could have been recorded. It was so brilliant and so moving, I think, to the actors and everyone involved. You want to say the ways I don't think it lived up to it, because everyone did such a fine job. And, you know, it's like, it's so hard to make a movie. There's 1,000 people involved. You know, there's so many things. So I know that it still has the power to move people 25, 26 years after it was released. And I think it's a real tribute to the filmmakers and the actors and everyone involved. I will say that Carl and I wrote a screenplay for George Miller when he was going to direct it. And we worked with George for a couple of years in Sydney, Australia, and in New York. And unfortunately, Warner Brothers ran out of patience with George's method, and he was fired. And so we never got to see the one we wrote with him, for him. But I look back on that as being maybe a little bit edgier and more ambiguous than the actual film that was made. Wish I could have seen them both.
I read that story, by the way, about George Miller and, you know, what might have been.
What might have been, right?
And yet Contact will always be one of my favorite films. And I suspect the same is true for a lot of people out there watching us right now.
That's what Bob told me, that people tell him, they come up to him, and that's the movie they most often mention, which, if true, is just wonderful because he's made a lot of very powerful films.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Roger Rabbit too. Right?
Back to the Future, I loved.
Back to the Future, and yeah, that gentleman who kind of went through history, changing things without really trying. I'll say, so forgive me, because I'm going to bring up something that, and this is my second question that I've been waiting to ask you about the film compared to the book. And it's about that awe-inspiring, there's the term again, truly jaw-dropping thing that happens at the end of the book. A perfect circle found within an irrational number, the number that largely defines a circle, a wheel within a wheel. Quoting from the book now, it's already here. It's inside everything. You don't have to leave your planet to find it. In the fabric of space and in the nature of matter, as in a great work of art, there is written small the artist's signature. Standing over humans, gods, and demons, subsuming caretakers and tunnel builders, there is an intelligence that antedates the universe. Why didn't this piece of pie, thank you for the opportunity to use that, make it to the big screen?
If I had gone into the ways in which I don't think the movie is as powerful as the book, that definitely would have been done. Because, okay, that comes straight out of my junior high school experience. My pie trauma in
story. Yeah.
Okay, so I won't go into great detail, but
please, for others out there, please.
Well, it's just that the day in my school, the day I learned that the 3.14 blah 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 was the constant formula for the geometry of a circle, I began to shake. I think I was 11 or 10, started shaking. I had a mathematical experience and raised my hand, Mrs. Ramirez. And she looked at me and said, yes, Anne. And I said, that ratio, 3.14, is true for every single circle, everywhere, every single circle. And she said, don't ask stupid questions. And I burst into tears. I was so humiliated, fled the classroom, didn't want to go back to school, never wanted to take another math class because I had gone from, that soaring joy of discovery to its polar opposite, that feeling of complete abject humiliation. And I told that to Carl early on in our relationship. And when we first started thinking of writing Contact, we both thought that was it was a pivotal story because first of all, it's about the power that teachers have over children and parents when they are unwilling to venture into the things they don't know. And so they shut the curious child down and squelch that hunger and that excitement. But also because, here's Eleanor Arroway. She is a skeptic. She has smart answers for all, the stories in the Bible and why they don't make sense. But she is, in this novel, just as we all are in life, hoist on her own petard. She goes on a journey. She sees her father who art in heaven. She has no evidence to prove it, and yet she knows the truth of it. And that's what we wanted to capture, not just the religious person's opening up to the scientific perspective, but the scientist being humbled by life, which is the greatest writer of all.
Humbled but uplifted.
Yes, but there is an uplift in humbling.
Yes.
To me,
yes.
Humility is uplifting. It is, in fact, it's way more uplifting than feeling big and feeling like you're the center of the universe, because then you become part of something much bigger than yourself. And so we wanted to find something that mathematicians and scientists and religious people could feel, not the endorsing of a large white man in the sky who gets mad at you if you love the wrong person or if you eat the wrong food. Not that endorsing that sense of God, but Spinoza's God, the God of the physical laws of the universe, and the fact that they are knowable and that we have been able to find out a teeny tiny number of them to become who we are today. So that was the idea, was to, and the last line is, she found what she had been looking for. That's it.
It is one of the most electrifying endings of any story that I've ever read. If I had it in front of me, I would read the Thomas Paine quote that you and Carl began one of the chapters with. I don't have it, but it also encapsulates what you've just expressed, as did Albert Einstein. I mean, I used to have the poster. He said it over and over and over, and one of his wonderful quotes was on my wall as a teenager. And thank goodness you recovered from that math class.
Well, Carl was a big part of that story. Carl was a very big part of that story. I think it took someone of the stature of Carl to help me get beyond that and to be willing to become a student and to learn. I
think he and you are still helping people to work through those kinds of things. Here's a comment from Mackenzie Uhlenhop. Sorry, Mackenzie. She loved that package. The sentence about the artist's signature gave me chills. Tremendous way to end the book, said Mackenzie.
Beautiful.
Eric Nelson.
Mackenzie.
He said, among others, wondered how much of that ending and the other spiritual elements in the book represented how Carl and you felt. I mean, I think you've answered that one very well.
Oh, yeah, completely. It did represent, we weren't capable of dissembling. It was, obviously there are characters in the book who are different than, have different values than we had, but the stuff that you could tell the stuff that spoke for our hearts.
We are nearing the end of our time together.
Too bad.
I know.
It was fun.
Oh, well, I hope you'll rejoin me for another one of these conversations.
Tell me the day. I'll be there.
Thank you. We are not quite there yet. I'm going to try and I'm reading them as, this is what you call a cold read in our business. Merk Boyan, one of my colleagues at the Planetary Society, our brilliant video and creative guy, one of many creative guys, people that we have on staff. Curious what Ann thinks about the upcoming generation of science and space communicators. Woo, great one, Merk. What advice might she give to young people who want to share their love of space with others?
Well, what a great question. I think it's wonderful. I think the number of scientists who are making an effort to connect with the public is a fantastic step in the right direction. I can't help myself, but I have to say, I really feel like Carl had so much to do with making that okay. Because
no question. Yeah.
I mean, when he was coming up, science was a kind of priesthood, and they didn't want any women or people of color or anybody in that group. They just wanted people exactly like them who only talked to each other. And they didn't even talk to other disciplines. And Carl played a huge role, along with others, in breaking down those walls, in making the interdisciplinary conversations that space exploration demands.
Planetary science, maybe the ultimate in multidisciplinary disciplines.
Exactly. And so I think it's wonderful. And I would like to argue to all of the administrators and faculties of the nation's institutions of higher learning that there should be a major in science communication in every single college and university in the world. Not only that, but I think it's very important that scientists who want an advanced degree in science should be required to take courses in communication, because the public makes science, big research, big experiments, space missions, all of those things, with few exceptions. We make it possible. And there is a debt to return, which is you can't have a democracy in which which is dependent on science and high technology, in which so few of us feel comfortable with science and high technology and know anything about it. There's no way to be an informed decision maker if you are completely ignorant of the workings and the methods and the values of science. And so I would like to argue for a requirement in communication for all scientists, because just as with our distant ancestors, you owe something to the human tribe to uplift and to enlighten this precious knowledge that you have.
And Carl, no question in my mind, through great tribulation, with you at his side, thank goodness, did open this up for so many science communicators who now have these new channels like YouTube and even TikTok, and are spreading the good word. I have another note here from Tim Lynch, who is a teacher, apparently. He says, on behalf of the teachers who do try to inspire children, I deeply apologize that you got that response from Mrs. Ramirez. And maybe,
Tim, thank you. I accept the apology.
A nice comment from Devin O'Rourke. He says, this is so good. You are both amazing. Well, it's the best that make it so. Thank you, Devin. Here is maybe a way to close from Billy Amptman. He says, the first time I saw the core of the Milky Way with my naked eye was in Green Bank, West Virginia, which of course is the home of the Green Bank Observatory, that wonderful telescope, which is still being used to conduct SETI. He saw this happened with him right after he saw contact for the first time. He says, when was the first time you saw the Milky Way without light pollution?
Oh, it may have been, because I was such a city girl, it may have been when we were shooting the original Cosmos series, because we shot in Chaco Canyon, in Wyoming, in a number of places where light pollution was not an issue. And it was possible at night just to look up and see the stars. But I do remember the very first time I saw Saturn's rings, and that was in the place of my birth in Queens. And I was 8, and I was on 196th Street on 73rd Avenue. And a neighbor of ours, who was also a friend, had bought his son a telescope, set up on this street in Queens, and aimed at Saturn. And I saw the rings of Saturn, and it was a life-altering experience. I never got over the fact that that light in the sky was a place. It was a place, a real place. And of course, the honor of participating even peripherally by making the Voyager record with Carl, Tim Ferriss, and Linda Sagan, all these people, Frank Drake. That was an amazing postscript to that first look from Queens.
Did you get much opportunity to go outdoors there in upstate New York and wonder at the sky with Carl and
with Carl? Yes, I remember with Steve Soder, our co-writer on the original Cosmos series, that very often we'd be working on a summer night, and there would be a Perseid meteor shower or something like that, and we would drive to a parking lot somewhere, someplace that didn't have any lights, and we would lie on top of our car, and the three of us, and we would just look up. And we did see, but the thing is, I live in Ithaca, beautiful Ithaca, which we call Mythica, because it's 10 square miles surrounded by reality. It's such a beautiful, enlightened, beautiful place, but cloudy. Many a night, I'm thinking, I'm going to see this astronomical phenomenon or that one, and too many clouds.
We're into bonus time now, but there is one question I forgot to ask you earlier, and I'll make this my final one. In that author's note, those acknowledgments that Carl put in the book that honored you and so many other wonderful people, he included one Pearl Druyan.
Ah,
Why did your mother make it in there?
oh, because she was a fascinating, brilliant person. And it's funny, I'm just going through her 27 novels that she wrote to read to my father. And my parents, when my dad retired, and our youngest child, Sam Sagan, was born, our parents bought the house across the road from us. And they were a huge part of our lives, as Carl's parents had been. We'd also lived with them in our house. So, and the interesting thing about us, and I know you don't have much time, but the interesting thing,
No, we're fine.
and
We're
I
fine.
think the reason that we had such an amazing idiom, shared idiom of love, is that our mothers and our fathers were virtually interchangeable. They were so much alike. The fathers, who were the sweetest bodhisattvas, these goodness emanated from every pore, witty, funny, everyone light up every room. And then these mothers who were so brilliant, but they were thwarted geniuses who had come of age in a time where women were not heard, honored, respected, and their thwarted genius had curdled a bit into something a little sharper. So, but my mother was a person of infinite curiosity. She read the way Carl did. She could easily go through a book, 3 books in a week. And there were things that she taught us about this planet that Carl didn't know and that I didn't know. And so we were very deeply indebted to her, and also wanted her to have some recognition, the recognition that the time and the society had never given her. And that's why she's in that introduction.
And I thank Pearl and your father for you.
Oh,
And I thank the universe for getting to live in the same epoch as you and Carl Sagan. Thank you so much. Good Lord. I can say it again. Another one of the most wonderful conversations I've ever been blessed to have in this role at the Planetary Society. Thank you so much. And I look forward to all of your upcoming work, including those 2 films. Good luck with the Writers Guild.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm so much looking forward to our next conversation. You are so generous, so stimulating, just so wonderful. I've never had a moment with you that I didn't find completely life enhancing.
Good Lord. Okay, we end there, everybody. Thank you all for joining us here in the book club. Next time, we will be talking about this book over here, Matthew Schindel, the space curator for the National Air and Space Museum.
Wow.
You would like this book, I think, Anne. It is all about civilization's long cultural history with the planet Mars, and really much more than that.
I'm going to find that book.
That's happening. And then we're going to, in a couple of months, maybe a little less, we're going to be talking with Mary Roach about packing for Mars, and that will also be delightful. Again, and thank you all of you for joining us and for being a part of the Planetary Society and this member community. Take care, all of you, and till next time. Ad Astra.